Welcome to everyone who's just joining. This is the Big Three Contract Enforcement Training presented by UAWD, Unite All Workers for Democracy. We're already getting a question in the Q&A box, which you can access at the bottom of your screen. Someone's asking if this is going to be recorded and shared later, and if you registered, you will definitely get the link. We're going to post this on YouTube after, so you'll be able to share it with your coworkers and come back to it if the information's helpful and you want to revisit it. Well, we're going to get right into it, and I expect more people will be joining, but we're just going to open up with introducing everyone who's here and helping present and going over the agenda that we're going to be using for the training. So I want to start by introducing all the members who are helping out with presenting this information. Deneen Brewer from Local 7, Ryder Littlejohn from Local 897, and Gary from Local 160. Welcome, everyone. You'll get to know these people as we get into the training, but just want to make sure that you recognize their faces. Okay, so here's the agenda for our training. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about what we've seen from the companies in the last few months. So we all know the Big Three are on a tear. They've been trying to get back at members for the stand-up strike last year and for winning large raises in the national agreement. Then we're going to get into a little bit about grievance handling. So we're going to talk about how to use grievances to enforce the Big Three contracts. And I just want to say up front, this is a training for everyone. So if you're a rank and file member, if you're a shop committee member, we want everyone to know a little bit about the grievance procedure because part of our strategy involves grievance filing. And then we're going to talk about ways that you can respond. So as the union, ways that we can respond to the counterattack coming from the company. The first of these is production standards, which is how much you have to work. So how much is being crammed into your job? Is the boss trying to change that? Are they trying to cut jobs, and how can we fight back? Then we're gonna give you a few quick tips for how to watch your back. So if you're gonna stand up to the company, you wanna know how to protect yourself, right? The next part is we're gonna talk about health and safety. This can be our weapon to fight back. We don't always wanna be on the defensive. We also wanna make sure that we're not letting the company just push us around. And then at the end of the training, we'll share a toolkit that's going to help you take the information that you learned today back to your coworkers and put this all into action. There'll also be some time for Q&A at the end. So if questions are coming up as we are going through this training, use the Q&A box in the bottom, and at the very end, we'll be asking the presenters to answer some of those questions. All right, thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass it off to Deneen to get us started.
Thank you, Beth.
Sorry, I forgot one slide real quick. We just want to reiterate something that I was saying a little bit of earlier. This is a workshop for everyone. So we here at UAWD believe that everyone should be involved in contract enforcement. You don't need an official role to do that. But there are some special roles that you might have to play if you're on the shop committee or a steward, like filing grievances. But we know that members are necessary to this process too, right? Because that's where the power comes from. It comes from the membership. So you can't just have representatives at the table without members backing them up. And we're going to talk about how everyone can work together to make the union as strong as possible. All right, without further ado, passing it off to you, Deneen.
Thank you, Beth. So, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Sunday to you guys. Let's start off with talking about management is on the attack, especially Stellantis. We all know that. So, terminating around 1,500 supplemental employees. We all had a family member or a friend that we know this happened to. Laid off hundreds of seniority employees while hiring summer replacement, which is crazy. But they're trying it. Pulling Toledo Assembly on a 7-day emergency schedule for a month. And they really don't even need these cards because now they have a part shortage. So there's your work-life balance, right, you guys? Next. Stellantis want to turn a big raise into more work for fewer people. So we all know that too, right? It is not just Stellantis. Well, we all know General Motors and Ford is trying to do the same thing too. Like General Motors is forcing Winsville to work nearly every Saturday using emergency language, trying to use our language against us. Like we don't have a family that we want to be with too on the weekends. All companies are disciplining workers for attendance and other issues. So this attendance policy is really hurting a lot of our friends and families. So we have to really pay attention to that. Meanwhile, the company won't address serious health and safety issues. So I know somebody in they plant is having these issues, if not all. It's the roof leaking, protective equipment, ventilation, oil spills, bathrooms, and we know how them bathrooms are, right? And broken high-low. So you guys, when you're filling out that paperwork, be very careful because as long as you're filling it out in the benefit of them, but once it's not benefiting them, they're going to pull your paper. So make sure you let somebody know when something is broke on those high-lows. The strategy. So at the end of this, they're going to give you some tools, but let's go over a couple of strategies. Production standards is it's our shield against job cuts. So what we're saying is just do your job, stay in your footprint, and follow your job standards. That way we can protect and bring back some of our sisters and brothers that's on layoff. Health and safety grievances is our sword to make management address unsafe conditions. So if you see something, say something. If you see something unsafe, call for your steward. If you can't call for your steward, then write it down and mark the date and time. And then when you see your steward, then make sure you get in touch with them. But we're going to go over all this and give you some tools to work with at the end of this session. So hold your questions and we'll be trying to answer every question you have. Thank you and have a blessed day, you guys.
Thanks, Deneen. Ryder, you're muted, but you're up next.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. Hello, everyone. So let's go over strikeable grievances. Like Deneen had mentioned, production standards are our shield against job cuts, and health and safety, that's our sword. So we can enforce prescribed production methods by working the rule and only doing what the standard calls for. If they want to speed up the line or add to the job, then they must change the process and perform a time study. This is where it is extremely important to talk to your coworkers so everyone understands what is at stake. When a standard change proves to be unreachable, a grievance can be filed. Same with new standards. The bosses have a set amount of time to normalize a standard, which is usually 90 days, but check your local agreements. Of course, the job you save may be your own, but it's definitely going to be a fellow member and their family. So that's our shield, production standards. Health and safety is our blunt force. We also have in our contracts, our new contracts, that ergonomic reps can file grievances. So Ergo is a good tool. And both of those, health and safety and Ergo, can go hand in hand with production standard grievances. So let's go to grievances 101, Becca. Why written grievances? These written grievances fall under special procedures. At Ford, it's Article 7, Section 23. But each of our agreements have the same language in one form or another. These grievances, the umpire has no jurisdiction over these grievances, and therefore they can become strikeable issues. The company has to react to these grievances, right? So what are your rights as steward and committee people? Your rights, you have the right to represent the members. You have the right to participate in investigative interviews. You have the right to all the information. You have a right to be free from retaliation. And you have a right to be treated as an equal. Next slide. So, when you investigate a grievance, it's the W's, who was involved, what happened, and in detail, as much detail as possible. Make sure you gather your facts and write everything down. When did it occur? Where did it occur? Why is it a contract violation? Who are the witnesses, and what remedy you would like? And I would also add one to this, which would be whoa, right? That's another W that you want to add, which is check your work, right? Make sure that everything is right, your dates, who, what, where, when, and why. No one can enforce the contract alone. The more people you have fighting, the stronger your grievance is going to be. So be alert to what's happening to you and your siblings around you. That helps put pressure on management. Like I said, be alert to what's happening to you and your siblings. Report any changes or time studies where you don't see a union rep involved. So if you see someone on the floor with a stopwatch, or just kind of hanging out, looking around, if it's an engineer or a member of management, make sure your committee person knows. Make sure the union knows that there may be a time study being done. Ask questions and get answers. You never know. Like I said, you never know if they are doing a time study. Next slide, Becca. Make sure you hold the bosses accountable to their responsibilities under our contracts. Remember that our rights are like muscles. They must be exercised to get stronger. Commitment from all levels of the union. Everyone reacts to pressure, and there is strength in numbers. So, more pressure you put on your committee person and your leadership, the more likely you're going to get results. So, section 3, we're going to look at production standards. You can't just tell everybody to slow down. You want to use words like work the rule, doing the best you can, things like that. When a standard is protested as unreasonable or unfair with a grievance, it can shield you from unjust discipline. If the company doesn't address the concerns in that grievance, you can always use that grievance to fight unjust discipline. Make sure you work at a reasonable pace without taking shortcuts or doing extra work for the boss. And like I said, you always tell them, I'm doing the best I can. I'm going as fast as I can using the prescribed method from the companies. So that's where we use production standard grievances to save jobs or help save jobs. That's based on a normal, reasonable worker, right? They can't expect you to work as Superman or Superwoman, but you have to work at a reasonable pace, right? So what's the contract violation? Each contract has this similar language. This is Ford language. Article 4, Section 4 gives the company the right to establish fair and equitable time standards. If you go to paragraph B, which I believe is on the next slide, paragraph B gives the UAW, the union, the right to protest those standards. This is under general provisions. Article 4, Section 4, paragraph A and B at Ford. GM and Stellantis, I'm sure, has similar language. So get familiar with that. Each company has a grievance procedure to resolve disagreements about work standards, production standards. Once it moves from Article 4, Section 4, it goes into a strikeable issue. At Ford, it's Article 7, Section 23, and those fall under special procedures. Though different, okay, go ahead. Though different, each procedure involves reviewing the work standard and comparing it to the real world conditions. That's where you want to get your job security rep involved and your committee person. And if that doesn't settle the issue, then we time study and go to grievance. These are examples. This is an example of the language at Stellantis. A member raises a work standard concern with a supervisor or asks for the chief steward. Chief steward may request an elemental breakdown. That'll break down each step of the job that you're looking at. The steward and supervisor try to resolve the matter by comparing the breakdown to real world conditions. So you want to make sure what's on that elemental breakdown translates to what's actually happening on the job, right? Are all conditions the same? If the matter is not resolved, a written grievance is filed at step 1 of the grievance procedure. Once a grievance is presented, the union may request a time study. Both company and the union industrial engineers can conduct the study. Normally it's done by both. I'll again remind you that if you see an engineer or you see management out there doing a time study, make sure your union's been notified, your committee person and your job security rep. The grievance then advances through the regular steps of the grievance procedure. Shop committee first, president, shop chair, and plant manager, and then to the international. That's when it becomes at Ford, Article 7, Section 23. That's a strikeable issue. That's when the international gets involved. When can you challenge? You can challenge a grievance. You can challenge a work standard at any time. Or when the operation is changed, if they do some type of change, a new piece of equipment, a new element, then you can challenge the open standard. They have to reopen the standard at that point, and then it becomes challengeable under the contracts. Other protections, if there is no standard, each Big 3 contract says that you cannot be disciplined for failing to make an expected amount of production. The Ford agreement contains additional protections, such as the right to change jobs for those physically incapable and protection from discipline until 4 days after being informed of the production standard. Each contract may be different there, so make sure you're familiar with your language. So tips for filing a work standard grievance. A work standard grievance is like any other grievance. Be sure you get all the facts. We talked about that show what the grievance is, how it came about, who is involved, and the remedy demanded. Request and review the standards before filing. This is crucial to decide whether to file a grievance and to prepare for what comes next. Okay, so this is at Ford we call them JSAs, but these are your job instruction sheets. Get familiar with those. These break down each element of the job and how many seconds each element takes. If any of those elements change, then they must review and open the standard. So how to argue a work standards grievance. When arguing the grievance, your strategy will be to show that the standard and or time study does not match the real world condition. Take written notes and add them to the record when possible. Things to look for: is the material the same? Is the model mix the same? Are the work conditions the same? Is the material placed in the same location? Is the material brought to the job in the same way? Is the material removed from the job in the same way? Is the machine operating exactly the same way? Are the same tools and fixtures being used? Is the motion pattern of the worker the same? And do the members now doing the job have the same amount of training and experience as the member who was time studied? So you want to make sure that the person that is being time studied is a qualified normal operator that can work at a normal, reasonable pace. If you don't have any of these, it's an off-standard condition, and that's when you'd want to write your grievance. When should you file a grievance? You want to be sure about these grievances so when you're confident that the job is overloaded. You don't want these grievances to backfire. You know, if you're not sure, then you could be counterproductive, right? You and your coworkers are prepared to work at a safe speed and make sure that every step of the job is followed. How to prepare with your coworkers. You want to identify all coworkers who could be in the same time study. Anyone who normally works the job or rotates on the job, team leaders, shift opposites, etc. That everybody needs to be prepared. Review the job elements with them. Review them together. Explain that there may be a time study. Ask them to work all steps when the study is conducted. Make sure that they skip no listed steps. So you don't want to be skipping any steps. You want to work right to the rule of that job standard, and don't include any additional missing steps. Ask them to work at a safe speed. Don't use words like, hey, slow down, or just make sure they're working safe at a normal, reasonable pace. Be careful of telling anybody to stop or slow down work. So Gary and I think at this point we'll go through a little exercise. Some common excuses you may hear. I like skipping steps and having a break at the end of my cycle. We all know about that. We get that carrot dangled in front of us to get done a little bit early, get an extra seat time or extra break time. People get used to doing their job one way, and they don't want to change the way that they do it. They don't want to listen to you. I don't want to be singled out, and I'm just here to make money. Right? So those are some of the common excuses that you're going to hear. I'm sorry, Gary.
I said you got to have a chance to look at your phone on every cycle.
Yeah, we talked about that, right? So. So
Okay,
Gary, you want to do a group exercise?
Sure.
I'll be the organizer, and you be the stubborn worker with the common excuses. So, hey Gary, I don't know if you know this, but we're going to have a time study in this department tomorrow. So we're asking everybody to make sure that they work right to the standard and do the best they can, and not take any shortcuts. Are you willing to do that with us?
Oh man, that sounds like a hassle. The boss is going to be picking on me if you do this.
We're all going to be doing it together, so you won't be singled out. I promise you that. We all talked about it yesterday, and we're going to make sure that we're doing all our steps and not skipping them. It's only going to be a day because they're doing a time study.
Yeah, but when I skip my steps, I can look at my phone, play my game of Candy Crush a couple seconds every cycle. I won't be able to do that.
Well, think about it this way, Gary. If we don't do it that way, it's possible that they could speed the line up, and you'll never be able to look at your phone. Or worse yet, they may cut a job over here, and I know you're low seniority. That job may be yours.
All right, you convinced me, Ryder. I like my job, so I'll participate and do whatever everybody else wants to do.
Thank you, brother. That's good news. I think, so let's take a poll. Can I be held to the same production standards if I haven't been trained on my job? True or false? Everybody got that? No, if you haven't been trained, that's a significant difference from the conditions when the time study was performed. So if you're not trained on the job, if you're not familiar with the job, if you're new to the job, you cannot be time studied in the performance of that work.
Okay, thank you, Ryder, for leading us through production standards and grievances 101. Now we're going to pass it off to Gary, and he's going to give us some quick tips for how to watch your back when you're going on the offensive, and then we're going to talk about health and safety.
Thanks, Becca. So one thing you always have to watch your back, no matter when you're working, because you never know, who might be after you. You wouldn't think your brothers and sisters would be, but management certainly tries to put things in people's way. So management does have tricks besides combining jobs to reduce the size of the workforce. The mindset of the management and all the big three right now is to get rid of our brothers and sisters. And now that we're getting a fair wage, they liked it when we had all kinds of temporaries and all these special things, but now the UAW is holding management, to task that they gotta pay everybody fairly. So they're trying to figure out ways to hurt you. So don't let the boss make a target of you. So I know when I am doing, writing a grievance or providing information and dealing with labor, I like it when people who are on the floor are taking specific notes of exactly what happened. When I have a written note to help me in a grievance, it's always better than not, because if I don't have that, a lot of times it turns into a he said, she said thing. And even when you are dealing with the boss, if you do have that written note or you've kept notes of it and your coworkers have done it too, it's more powerful than not having it. Any piece of information we have as a steward or a committee person helps us with that. And always, but now more than ever, be aware of how many points you have in the attendance procedure. At GM right now, a lot of it is being late. That's really what they're cracking down on. And they're trying to put people into what's called document 8 for GM, which is an attendance procedure. Once you get in, it's hard to get out of. They eventually try to fire people out of that procedure. But make sure, if you're late, try to work on it, try to be on time. If there are mistakes, come to us, let us help you with it. But don't make yourself easy for them to get us. Next slide. Health and safety. So here's some of the common issues for health and safety: roof and door seal leaks. Anywhere you can see it in the plant, you can make it an issue. On your job footprint, it's not only about things around the outside your job footprint. There might be oil on the floor, your mat might not be good, part of the floor might be missing. Things like that are a real issue for you and something you need to let your steward know about it, and your boss, saying, I can't work safely if I got a tripping hazard on the floor that, I have to walk over 600 times a day. Ventilation and hazardous materials, dust, fumes, mist, vapors, gases, and etc. And nowadays, a lot of us have batteries in our plants, and the batteries have a bad record in our plant so far. The batteries will catch fire, out of the blue, or the companies will say it's not fire, it's a thermal event, but then the batteries will be smoking for, a whole shift, because they don't have a place they can take them. And even though it might not be right on your job, the fumes from the battery being on fire may, get into your area, and that's, it's a serious health issue. Unsanitary bathrooms, we all know that, the company doesn't want to pay for our third parties nowadays to spend time cleaning our bathrooms. They don't care about your bathrooms there. They'll keep the bathrooms nice at the front of the plant where their management offices are, but the bathrooms we use, they're in bad shape. And, don't work with defective equipment. If it's putting your safety at risk, the vehicle, the hoist, whatever, let us know. Let your supervisor know. You never want to work with something where you're trying to force it, because if you get hurt from that defective equipment, they're going to blame you. They're going to say, oh, you didn't say nothing to us. You didn't do this, didn't do that. Let us know. Unmarked pinch points. So any place, there might be something where they haven't taken the time to consider the pinch point on your job. Maybe there's a spot where the vehicles might come close together and you could get squeezed in it. I've seen that happen before. Personal protective equipment. So at General Motors, at least I know, personal protective equipment can't have holes or rips. It has to be, it doesn't mean it has to always be new. But if there's holes or rips in any sort of equipment, or your glasses are broken, or whatever it is you use on your job, if it's not fully covering your body, then it's defective. And that's something we can write grievances on. Next slide. So what does the contract say? Stellantis agrees to recognize the obligation to provide a safe and healthful working environment for employees. The implementation of actions to help our employees realize a healthy, injury-free work environment is a leadership responsibility. Responsibility for health and safety matters remain, however, with the company. I'm not that crazy about that language, because it almost sounds like to me that the union doesn't have its part in it. I know none of this language is perfect, but when we don't have our part in it, then the company just, they can pull it to themselves. Can I see the next slide, please? All right, this is the GM language. The company recognizes its obligation to provide a safe and healthful working environment for employees. We are committed to protecting the health and safety of each employee as the overriding priority of the company. Well, I tell you this, the overriding priority of the company, they say that a lot, but then when there's an issue that's slowing things down, it's not the overriding priority. Production is. And we as the union are responsible to hold them to, that degree. Part of our language at GM says that your district committee person is supposed to, or is encouraged to, whatever it is, go on one safety walk every week. So that means your committee person should be going to some part of his area every week and doing, a safety overview. If he does find something that's unsafe, he should be utilizing the tools that he has at his disposal. All plants have an industrial hygiene person that's union that can measure things that seem unsafe, like gases or whatever. We have ergonomic reps at GM that, if he sees something unsafe from that point of view, he should be saying something. So part of it is the member looking out for themselves, and part of it is your shop committee helping you out. Okay, next slide. So Ford says the company shall have the obligation to continue to make reasonable provisions for health and safety of its employees during their hours of employment. The union shall cooperate with the company's efforts to carry out its obligations. I like that language a little bit better, because it puts the onus on both sides, not just the company. Yes, the company needs to keep you safe, and they should want to keep you safe, because if you are off of work, it costs them money too. But too often they just look at the goals of whatever production is. Okay, next slide. The main point is each company recognizes it has the obligation to provide a safe and healthy workplace. But like I say, the biggest reason for them, if you are hurt, it's going to cost them money, but they don't always think about that. But for my brothers and sisters on this call, it's all about, looking out for each other, because we don't want anybody hurt. I want everybody to go home with their 10 fingers and their 10 toes and their back not cracked, or, arm hurt. That's, what we're here for. All right, next slide. Can I only grieve safety issues that are specifically addressed in the contract? No, there's a whole lot of things you can grieve that's not specifically mentioned. So down below, it talks about OSHA violations and company violations. Each plan also has a state OSHA. In Michigan, it's called My OSHA, which has its own set of rules also, which, are things we can grieve. And, as far as I'm concerned, I'll try to write a grievance for anything I can. Sometimes they'll get thrown out, but I'd rather have a frivolous grievance than no grievance at all, for anything that, the member deems is unsafe, next slide. Writing a good health and safety grievance. Request a remedy that gets to the root cause. If the roof is leaking, don't request a patch, request a new roof. This gives us more room to negotiate. That's always a tip in all negotiations, is to ask for as much as you possibly can get. And then sometimes you have to settle for less. But if it's a frequent thing with the roofs, you do want a new roof, because if you fix it one time, it's just going to leak somewhere else. Request relevant information, e.g. injury records, measurement of noise levels, air contaminants, and airflow. So some of these things, like if you have an industrial hygiene person in the union, we can do ourselves. Some of them we need to get from labor, and labor is not always forthcoming with all types of information. In fact, not to get off topic, but I have a different grievance, which I've been waiting for 2 months for information from labor. And I'm going to inform them on Monday and by email, because everything has to be documented, that if they don't provide me the information by the end of July, I'm going to file an unfair labor practice with the NLRB. So getting this information is not always easy, and any information you can provide your committee person to get the information, or things or somebody who was hurt 2 years ago, is relevant to your grievance. And then we want to interview witnesses and collect as many statements as possible. Another thing that's key, because, we want to hear things from every point of view, because there might be something that you're saying that somebody down the line, 3 or 4 spots, may know a different part of it, which will help your case. Can I refuse to work over a safety issue? Yes, but only if you are in imminent danger. So this is kind of hard, unless it's something that's genuinely gonna hurt you right away. The standard is that a reasonable person should agree there's reasonable danger of death or serious injury. It doesn't always have to be serious injury per se, but if it's a tripping hazard and somebody fell yesterday, they shouldn't just continue on that job. If, you ask for your steward, your committee person, you ask for your health and safety rep, and they should be able to come down there and deal with your supervisor. Now, if your supervisor doesn't agree, your committee person or steward should be able to go up to his next level and try to get resolution. But sometimes it doesn't always happen. There must be enough time due to the urgency of the hazard to get it corrected through regular enforcement channels. So something like this, I know in the GM language, it talks about either stopping the procedure or stopping the job. Now, if somebody's working on like a production machine, they're more willing to, stop a job for something like that. If you're stopping the assembly line, just being honest, it's not as easy for them to do it. So next slide. Poll. Do you need to be a health and safety rep to file a safety grievance? So Becca's putting the poll up.
Yep, you should see the poll on your screen, and I'll give people 10 more seconds or so to respond. Okay, so I'm gonna end the poll. We've got 13% of people saying they think this is true, 77% of people saying they think this is false, and 10% saying it depends. What do you think, Gary?
Well, at GM, really, our health and safety reps never file a grievance. It's almost always myself as a committee person or steward that would file a grievance. Sometimes on things where, we need the health and safety reps decision as to whether something is safe or unsafe, we will get their opinion and then we write the grievance. We have a separate form too at GM. I don't know if it's the same in the other companies for a health and safety grievance because it's supposed to be given a higher priority and go what's called the Plant Safety Review Board at GM, where the management does take the Plant Safety Review Board seriously. I think some things they don't, but it's not always labor that runs the Plant Safety Review Board. It's usually the plant manager. So I think that's an important thing, but our ergonomics reps would never file a grievance.
All right, thank you so much, Gary. So I'm going to take back over from here. So there was a lot of information that was presented over the course of this workshop, especially when it comes to some of the technical parts of production standards and health and safety in the contract. You don't need to remember every little bit of information shared, but we're going to send the recording of this training if you want to go back to any of the details. The important thing is that you're going back to your plant or your workplace and you're thinking about how you can take action with your coworkers around these issues and this strategy. So if you're ready to do that, we're going to recommend the first thing you do is you choose one issue to focus on. So we talked about health and safety and we talked about production standards, and we made toolkits that you can use to share your knowledge from this training with your coworkers and try to develop a plan for how you're going to take action, whether it's with your team or your department or another group you're in that's experiencing these issues together. So I encourage you all to go to the link uawd.org/toolkit, and I'm going to put that in the chat right now. And download whichever toolkit you need to get started. And if you need more support, you can always reach out to a UAWD staff organizer. So shoot us an email at uawdemocracy@gmail.com. Or you can reach out to me personally. I'm going to put my number in the chat and we'll get you the support that you need. We also want to just close by saying, before we get into some Q&A, that we're an organization of UAW members building a stronger union and holding leaders accountable. And if this is your goal as well, you should join, because it's tough to do this on your own, and our members and our staff are here to support you in enforcing your contract. So some of the things that we talked about today and beyond, you can join us at uawd.org/join, and I'll put that link in the chat right now too. If you haven't heard, we're having a convention this September. It's going to be here in Detroit, or just north of Detroit in Southfield, from September 27th to September 29th. So registration is on an early bird discount through July 31st, and that means that for $100, you can register and see more workshops like this one, meet other reformers, and hopefully get inspired hearing stories from people who are bringing this back to their shops and putting it into practice. So you can register at uawd.org/convention. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me at the number I put in the chat. Now we're going to get into some Q&A. So if anyone is having trouble putting a question in the chat or prefers to raise their hand and say their question themselves, you can raise your hand. I see some hands raised. I also see some people commenting in Q&A that chat is disabled. I just want to make sure that people know how to access the Q&A box. I'm guessing the people who are doing this through Q&A do know how to access that, but if you don't, You can see that at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A, and you can ask a question there. We're gonna pick some of the questions, and we're gonna spend about 15 minutes answering them. So I'll just read some of the questions that are coming in, and Gary and Ryder, whichever of you wants to respond, you can go ahead, and then we'll get to some of the hands that are raised too. So one question in the chat is, what if the whole plant was increased in speed and wasn't time studied? Can you do a production standards grievance for that? So the whole line speeds up.
Well, so typically in a situation where the whole line speeds up, at least the General Motors, they're supposed to add more people to the line. It's not, you can't just speed the line up and expect everybody to work faster. And yes, you could do a whole plant-wide one, but that wouldn't be the case. That would be a case where they would do a time study. I remember one time I was working at an engine plant, and it was, instead of a speed up, it was a slowdown. So they added extra things to everybody's job and took people away from a line. This one lady who was trying to do a job just couldn't do a job. She went through 3 days of trying to keep up with the line, pulling the andon cord and stopping the line. So the engineer who was doing that line got frustrated, and he says, "I'll show you how to do this." So the engineer gets on the job that this lady's job is overloaded, and he proceeded to work on that job for 4 hours, and he kept shutting the line down. So finally, at the end of that day, he said, "Enough's enough." So then they added people back to the line.
Yeah, you would have to find if it hasn't been time studied, then yes, you could definitely file a grievance. On an assembly line, there should be a control job, which is the job that has the most elements or takes the most time. So that's the job that you would want to find and grieve. And the IE should know that.
Thanks, Ryder and Gary. So moving on to the next question, I'm seeing a lot of variations of this question. People are asking, what if my steward or committee person isn't filing a grievance and I'm asking them to? What can I do?
So what you need to do in that case is ask for your zone person, or whatever they call it, your plant. If your zone person isn't responding to you, then you need to move it up to the chairman. If that's not responding, a group of you need to go to the next local meeting. And I know this isn't great, but that's where you got to raise your complaints. You got to bring it out in the open, what's going on here. Because I know there are some shop committees that are like that, and you need to demand change.
Anything to add to that, Ryder?
Other than follow your chain of command, right? You have the region, you have the international, you have the public review board, or bring it to the union meeting. Exactly what Gary said.
Thanks. Definitely want to underscore that you can also get your coworkers involved if your union rep's not responding. The more you demonstrate that this is an issue that matters to a lot of members, the more likely they are to respond, right?
They respond to pressure, yeah. So I think it was in one of the slides, and we touched on it. The more people you have putting that pressure on your leadership, the more reaction you'll get.
Awesome. So we have a question that sounds like this is more for people who deal with grievance handling. So you mentioned collecting a lot of information about the violation before the grievance. How many details of the contract violation should we write down in the grievance versus bringing them up at the grievance procedures step meetings? Which approach is more strategic?
So when you're working with your committee person or steward, you want to give them every detail possible. Like the form we use to file grievances, you can't necessarily put everything on that form. And part of it is when, your committee person is dealing with your supervision or your general supervisor or labor, depending, what part it is. But you want to provide as much information as possible so that a committee person or steward has all the information to battle with management.
Yeah, a lot of that information that you're gathering is not going to go to the company, right? The committee person is going to write a grievance with a brief argument and then go into the grievance meeting armed with the facts that you gave that person, right? So not all those facts are going to be captured in the body of the grievance. They're just there for that committee person to argue when it goes to management.
And a lot of times when we're in a meeting like that, having all that information is key because management will lie or they will say something that's contradictory to it. So if we have, something that backs us up in that case, a lot of times that'll work with labor, not all the time, but times, we realize that we got to move it up beyond them into labor. And if they put their facts down and their facts are wrong, it usually helps us.
Don't forget, sometimes the grievances get pushed out and it takes time, right? So information disappears. So it's best to get all the information you can at the earliest time possible.
Right, and then the fact of grievances being pushed out, at least at my plant, that's a General Motors thing right now, is all our grievances, they're trying to slow play them in management with every reason, they come up with, and labor's doing the same thing. That's their game right now. If it's anything that's going to help our union members, they're trying to make it take as long as possible. And, we've had to get our regional reps involved. I talked to the UAW GM Vice President, Mike Booth, a couple weeks ago about all our issues. And, that's one of their tools they're trying right now to save themselves money.
All right, we've got another question. This one's about health and safety. Someone is asking, what about excessive noise from job process when it's not followed properly? What about excessive noise in general is another question I'd add. Is that a health and safety issue?
Can be if they're not trying to, you would want to try to get them to mitigate it, right? So, sound shields, right? You can ask for things like that to mitigate that noise. They might not be able to eliminate it, but you could grieve that it's excessive and ask for things, to mitigate the sound.
Yeah, and
But
at
yeah.
our plant, every year we have an annual noise study done on areas, even though our plant is not that loud per se, but if it was, if you complained about your job, the IH tech, when they did the noise study, would come to your job and check your job. And it might not be immediate, but it would be sometime during that year.
So if you're having issues with noise, have someone come by and measure it. Take
Yes.
a look at that. Awesome, thanks. Okay, here's another interesting question we're getting. So we've heard a lot of the time that the people on first shift are usually the ones that get time studied. So what would you recommend if you're on an off shift and you really want your job to get reassessed? And you need to sort of depend on the people on first shift who are likely to get time studied. How would you guys prepare in that case?
First of all, I won't lie to you, that's not easy because first shift does always get more focus and more, if people are complaining, first shift is gonna, get it. So what you want to do to help yourself out is work with your partners that are on first shift and see if there's anything going on different from shift to shift. They might be adding something to your job on second shift that, the first shift people don't have to do. Make sure you're on the same page. work with your steward or committee person to work with the first shift steward or committee person, you know, to try to help you in this situation.
Thanks, Gary. Do you have anything to add to that, Ryder?
Oh, I think Gary captured it well.
Awesome.
But,
So one last question. This is sort of going back to the question that's coming up in multiple forms about what do I do if the union isn't really taking up my grievance and fighting for it. So someone asked, what about drafting the grievance and presenting it to your committee person or a union meeting so that it's harder for them to just ignore it? Do you think there are things like conducting interviews or writing the grievance up themselves that can help push a grievance along and get it taken care of?
So I would agree that drafting the grievance, I would present it at your local meeting. It might not be as effective if you just present it to the one person who's trying not to do it. Put it in front of your whole shop committee because they should all be at your union meeting, you know, and then, you know, the whole shop committee has to answer for it, including the chairman. You know, if you have a difficult job, your chairman may just ignore it. And, you know, and being completely honest and forthright. Luckily, I work at my local, everybody's on the same team of trying to handle all our people's grievances. It doesn't always work, but you might have a shop that's, you know, not working for you. But if you put it in front of everybody and they don't do anything, then complain to your region. You know, there's a whole process to go through with all locals. If it doesn't get resolved, you can push it up. Bring as many people as possible if you're running into that situation.
Thanks, Gary. Hopefully that answers some of the questions about chain of command and how to escalate in the chat. One other thing that someone's asking we share is people can request copies of your grievance. It's your right to get a copy of the grievance. So if your rep said they filed a grievance, you should be requesting updates and make sure that you've seen that grievance and gotten a copy of it in writing.
Yeah, I agree. On our grievances, we have a copy that goes to labor, a copy we retain, and a copy for the member. So I can't speak for Chrysler or Stellantis or Ford, but that copy's there. If not, they can make a photocopy of their grievance and give it to you.
We have the same process at Ford, and yes, we always give a copy.
Awesome. Well, I think we've addressed most of the major questions in the Q&A box. We're coming up on an hour here, so I think it's about time that we wrap up. I want to thank everyone one more time for coming and thank Ryder, Gary, and Deneen for helping present this training. You're going to be getting an email with the toolkit that I shared in the chat, but encourage you to check it out in the meantime, and we'll also be sending out this recording so that you can share it with your coworkers. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your Sunday. Solidarity, everyone.
Thanks.
Solidarity.
Have a good day.